So hello and welcome to another one of our Spark Innovation videos. Today we are here to speak to Mahendra at the British Library. So come on inside and learn a little bit more about the British Library Labs. So hello and welcome to one of our Spark Innovation videos today. We are here at the British Library. Mahendra, thank you very much for joining us. First, could you just introduce yourself and what you do here at the library?
Hi, my name's Mahendra Mahey. I'm the manager of a project at the British Library called British Library Labs. And in essence, it's a project which tries to get people to experiment with the library's digital collections and data.
The first question is one that we've asked all of our contributors. And first, what is innovation to you?
I think it means lots of things to lots of different people, but for me, it's about doing something or making something that makes people's lives easier or adds value and impact. Ultimately, in sort of public sector context, sort of to benefit people.
Mahendra, why innovate?
So I think innovation helps organisations grow and evolve, and it makes them start thinking about things a little bit differently. For example, the way they do things, the way they make things, creating new products, new business opportunities. And it's looking at how these things could be improved, changed, or invented from scratch. And for me, it can add value to the people within the organisation, but obviously if you're a company and you have clients or customers, it's how possibly that would impact them as well.
Okay, so Mahendra, do you think that culture is important for encouraging innovation?
Absolutely, sort of working in organisations, I think it's really important to create space or time to allow people to experiment, and I think it's really important to, and when you do that, to create an atmosphere where people aren't afraid to make mistakes, and I think that's one really important lesson that we've learned.
Brilliant. So then, if I ask you a little bit more about the labs, so first of all, why were the labs set up? What were they trying to achieve?
Okay, so the labs was set up about 5 years ago, and it was a project which was externally generously funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And the purpose of the labs was very much about focusing on getting our primary audience, which are researchers, to experiment with the library's digital collections and data. So that was pretty much, in essence, what the project was about.
So then, in terms of practically these sort of collaborations and making this work, what have you learned from this process in terms of what are the kind of key steps you need to do to make collaboration work to help you innovate?
In the context of the library, there's quite a lot of things. So the first thing is we want people to do things with our digital collections and data. So the first thing that we have to do is we need to spend quite a bit of time focusing on what we actually had, so that we could then tell the world what we have to then encourage them to use it. And at the beginning, we had a sort of bit of a chicken and egg situation because we didn't really have many examples of usage. So what we decided to do was to run an international competition where we presented a list of collections and digital collections and data, and we asked anyone in the world to come up with innovative ideas of what they might want to do with it. And the whole basis of the competition was that people submit ideas, and then we would then choose 2 of those ideas to actually work on in a very agile way for between 4 and 6 months. Part of the deal of signing up to the competition was that if you didn't win, you still had to make your idea public. And that was, for us, an easy way to start to build lots of examples of things that people wanted to do. So in a way, it was kind of giving us free research and development, because we started to get an idea of sort of the vast range of different things people wanted to do. But obviously, once we'd chosen the ideas, we then were able to work very, very closely with those individuals or teams. And in a very, very short space of time, between 4 and 6 months, we gave them some technical development and financial resources and human resources, and just try to help them get to the point where they could actually make something or answer a question that they originally proposed. And that was, having the time element really helped, because we actually had an event at the end, an international event with hundreds of people attending, where they actually had to then tell the world what they actually did. So that kind of created a little bit of internal pressure to actually deliver something, which I think was actually quite an important ingredient.
So, Mahendra, one of the ways that you collaborate, you mentioned there, is the competition. But I know you also have other ways that you look at collaborating to innovate.
Yes, so what was really important for us was to provide as many examples to inspire people to use our collections. And at the beginning, when you're starting from the beginning, it's actually quite difficult. So we tried to think of as many other ways that we could do this. And one way was to actually launch something called the British Library Labs Awards, which was show us what you've already done with our collections. And this was just people submitting work, either in a research capacity, artistic, commercial, educational capacity, and submitting work that they'd actually done, which has not been funded by us, and then us giving them a prize and some recognition. So I think we were really looking at the brand of the British Library and people wanting to be associated with it. And then the other way is working on collaborative projects. Just that kind of happened organically, and I'd like to talk about one in particular. When we started out with this whole venture, we felt that we needed to practice what we preached. We were encouraging other people to experiment with our digital collections, and we thought it's really important that we get that experience too, so we know how people feel. And we were looking for different collections that we could start our journey on, and we settled on a collection of 65,000 digitized books from the 19th century, which were originally paid for by Microsoft in 2007 and 2008. So they paid for the digitization, and it was an attempt for Microsoft to get into the digitization business. I think Google were getting into the digitization business at the same time. What was interesting about that project was, at the end of it, Microsoft decided they didn't want to get into the digitization business and left us all the assets for free. What we did initially was to make that collection completely openly licensed, public domain, which meant that anyone can do anything with those materials, those digitized materials. And these materials were mostly from the 19th century. So these were books mostly that were digitized. And that was a really, really important decision, because it meant that we started to take away barriers on what people could do with it. So if it's openly licensed, public domain, it means you can use it for commercial or non-commercial reuse. So we focused on that collection. What we did first was we ran some initial experiments. So all the books were scanned. They were originally scanned to try to extract the text from the book. So you take an image of a 19th century, a page of a 19th century book, and then software tries to recreate the text. And as an interesting artifact was that the images from those books were also identified. So it if you imagine, it drew rectangles around anything it spotted as an image. So we wrote some software to actually take all those images out of the books, a bit like getting a pair of scissors and cutting out all the pictures from books, but we did it digitally. And so this was an experiment we were running internally. What we did was we then decided to run a kind of an experiment, which was to see if, once we were cutting out these images, could we identify the faces in those images. So we used face recognition software, which we'd taken from sort of environments where it's been used to recognize photographs, and we ran that software on these 19th century images. Now, 19th century images tend to be illustrations, and so we found some interesting results. The software that's been developed for photographs was very good at identifying female 19th century illustrations, but not male. Because one of the things we felt was male illustrations tend to be exaggerated: beards, hats, glasses, guns, and so female poses tend to be stereotyped, and so it was kind of easier for the software to do that, to identify those things. From that initial internal experiment, we started to publish those images on the web. And we kind of initially thought about going to our sort of internal committees to start to think about building a platform, but because our project was time limited, we felt that we didn't really have time to go through that internal process. We had to just find an existing platform out there that just worked and kind of ticked a lot of the boxes for us. So what we eventually settled on was probably, it's quite old-fashioned now, but a website called Flickr, Flickr Commons. I think Instagram has now kind of superseded that. But what we did was we published these images from these 65,000 books onto Flickr Commons. The beauty of that was Flickr Commons was free. They gave it to us for free. Every image had its own unique website, and most importantly, it had an API, an application programming interface, which allows computers to be able to access all the data around the images. One of the first experiments we ran was we were effectively taking images out of books, and we knew about the books the images came from, but we didn't know about the actual images themselves. So what we were really inadvertently going into was an experiment into crowdsourcing. And what happened was, as we were putting the images up, Flickr Commons allows users to actually tag those images. So, fish, dog, cat, portrait, mountain. And we kind of started to go on this journey of crowdsourcing. To cut a long story short, we found that there were individuals who were doing it by hand, and also individuals who were using computational methods, so using techniques that sort of draw into sort of artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually try to automatically tag those images. But for us, what the important lesson about all of this was that we were able to having the collection completely openly licensed meant it removed barriers about what people could do with it. Putting it on a platform which was completely open, you didn't need to even have a login to be able to actually download the images. You needed a login to tag the images, but then to actually do things computationally as well, you could do that with certain restrictions, but you could do that fairly easily. And that kind of resulted in lots of other projects. I'll just quickly list a few. One of the very first projects we worked on was with an artist who took some of those images and collaged them and made them into giant paintings, which were exhibited at a festival in America called Burning Man. We worked with that artist to bring that artwork to the British Library and exhibit his giant paintings in the piazza outside. We worked with 3 19-year-olds who proposed an idea that they could automatically tag all the images. By the way, I didn't actually mention how many images we managed to snip out of the 65,000 books. It was about 1 million. And so part of the challenge we had was, a lot of these images weren't identified. Some of them were beginning to get identified through a combination of human and computational efforts. But we worked with a group called SherlockNet. They were actually 3 19-year-olds from Stanford who submitted an idea for our competition, which I mentioned earlier, and they used artificial intelligence methods, and they effectively tagged every image at least 15 times with some reasonable accuracy, not It wasn't always brilliant, but it was kind of interesting. I'm just trying to think of any other examples. I mean, there's lots and lots of examples, but I know I've sort of probably spoken a lot about them, so I think I'll stop there.
So, Mahendra, you talked there a lot about how open data has been sort of pivotal to what the British Library Labs is doing now. But I guess what a lot of people wonder now, though the term is kind of en vogue, is why go through all the effort? What are the real benefits that you get from opening up data for anyone to access?
Okay, so for us, it was absolutely crucial to have a very sound example to be able to convince the doubters of the value of opening up data. And the journey that I told you about, which was about algorithmically snipping images out of digitized 19th century books and putting them onto Flickr Commons, that journey really kind of gave us lots of examples and evidence of the value of opening up our collections. So the fact that we were able to use an existing platform to be able to put the data on, which meant that we weren't tied up with time and decisions, because the collection had already been openly licensed. And let me just say, that is actually a significant barrier for lots of institutions and organizations and companies on actually getting people to work with data. So we're very lucky that we actually have an internal process by which people make decisions about, are we going to make this open or not? And that's actually really quite important. It's effectively like risk management. So they're effectively making a decision about the risk of making this available openly. So somebody's making a decision about risk. But once we were able to put this on a platform, luckily it was free. It took us about 2 weeks to upload 1 million images onto Flickr Commons. Took a bit of a time, but it was definitely worth it. It kind of gave us all the things that we were looking for, which we would hope to get from an internal system. The thing that we didn't have was time. So what we were able to do was piggyback on an existing system to say, look, these are all the ingredients that we would need to make data available openly. And what was amazing was a lot of these books that have been digitized had hardly ever been taken out at the library. So by taking the images out of these books and putting them online, every single image has been seen at least 30 times. And a lot of these books, probably some of them weren't even opened. So that's what was one real benefit. And we've had nearly 1 billion views of the images since we launched, and we've had nearly 17 million tags added to the images. What that gives us is an example which we can then go back to our internal committees to say, this is the value of making data available openly. On one level, you can argue theoretically what the benefits are, but it's much, much more powerful to give a real solid example. And that's why it was so important to have a solid example, a real example. And that particular project, it wasn't just having the platform, having it openly licensed, but also having things like an API, which gives computational access to that collection and that data. But what it has done is generated lots and lots of examples of use. So we've used that to be able to sort of say, this is the kind of infrastructure we would want in the library.
I think that's a fantastic example of, I'm sure that many companies can say that they have huge amounts of data that they don't necessarily know what to do with. And it's a great example of looking at books that no one's sort of even opened. Mm-hmm. And how there's a lot of value that can be extracted for research purposes for the public.
I think for us, the most critical thing was time. Time really focuses the mind on making decisions. And as a kind of a side project, we actually started to look at, well, wouldn't it be good to have an open portal for all the data sets that we've openly licensed? So we have developed that since. From that project, And what we've decided to do is not wait to clean the data up. We've just decided where we found data and it's been openly licensed, just to put it out there. Before we actually made this available online, we were literally having to ship hard drives to people just to give them the data in any form that we could possibly give it to them. But now we're at a stage where people can download large amounts of data, and we have this kind of philosophy in labs to embrace dirty data. Just accept it as it is, because it takes a lot of time and effort to actually clean it up. And maybe, it's for us, our philosophy has been just to get it out there and tell people about it. It involves a lot of hard work and a lot of effort. We do lots of engagement. We have to go out and talk to lots of people. A lot of this data isn't easily visible on search engines like Google. So we have to do a lot of external engagement, but it's getting it out there. We're lucky that we already have examples of use from the Flickr Commons example. So we can say, here's some examples of what people have done with this kind of data set. But we've managed to put other kinds of data sets out there. So for example, digitized pub signs, playbills from theatres, 90,000 of them, that need identifying, for example. All sorts of very mixed variety of different things. But the precursor to all of this was this very, very, very strong example, which was a way to say, this is the evidence and this is the proof of actually making it available. That's why we should be doing more of this.
I'm quite interested in where you're coming at this culturally from the embracing dirty data kind of thing. Sometimes people talk about, when you say you need to innovate, people say, not now. Things are too uncertain. What would you say to that?
Well, I sort of talked about time, and because we were project based and we were a small team, there was quite a bit of pressure on us to sort of deliver results fairly quickly. So we kind of rejected the idea of perfectionism, and we just kind of, our philosophy was more good enough is sometimes good enough. And we just, it was a question of just getting on with it. And we made lots of mistakes as well. It wasn't all, there weren't always success stories, but we were able just to try things. And it was also a trade-off as well, because sometimes there could be an investment if we had the time and resources on making this data perfect, but we just felt it was better just to get it out there, and there would be people out there who would have the skills to be able to do things with it. And that's really, it came from practical experience. Probably, I would say, bringing it all back, time was the factor, and that can, if you can artificially generate, a sort of pressure of time to be able to do things, it can actually really focus the mind on what is the sort of the minimal viable thing you want to do, and that's kind of what we learned. So that was one of the sort of advantages, I think, of having a sort of time-based project.
So, Mahendra, you've touched on this a little bit throughout the interview, but what are some of the challenges that you faced in terms of opening up the digital collections here?
So opening up digital collections, it's a time-based process, so it actually requires resources. So you effectively need a group of people that represent the organization to sit down and actually consider a collection, a digital collection in this context, and decide whether we want to make this available openly. And so they will look at it from different levels, from different angles, of risk. So somebody may look at it from a commercial side, some of them may look at it from a legal side, somebody may look at it from a sort of reputational risk side of things, and that takes time and energy. So that's been one of the challenges. We've been very lucky to actually have this process. There are many organizations that haven't even thought about setting up a process like this. But I would say one of the lessons we've learned is, and one of the benefits we've had on working with labs, is to actually have this process. The disadvantage is it just takes time, because people have to look at each data set, each digital collection, as a kind of an individual story. And each collection will have its own story about why it could be used or why it couldn't be used. So for example, we have digitized photographs of Buddhist monks that are considered holy relics. So we cannot make those available to the public. It could be all sorts of reasons why we can't make things available openly. And they may not be obvious at the beginning. It's only once you start sort of examining the backstory and so forth. The other challenge that we have is that people assume that all our physical collections are digitized, and they're not. People just assume that, and actually it's only a very small fraction. So when we go out and tell people to try to encourage them to do things with our collections, we have to debunk some myths about the library, and one of them is about, everything's digitized. It isn't. It's only a small fraction. So the dialogue that we tend to have with our data and people who want to use it, it's unless we have something that you're looking for, that the dialogue tends to be, this is what we have, what can you do with it? And we're lucky now, after nearly 5 years, that we've got plenty of examples to show people of what people have done with other different kinds of data. But I would say that's hard work. We run lots of ideas labs, workshops, where we try to sort of, imagine different uses. But that dialogue is hard, and it a lot of effort's involved. We don't always get lots of success, but we know that it's something that's cyclical. We have to keep doing it. It's important for us to continue to engage with people, to try to stimulate ideas, I think that's a really important ingredient of innovation. You've got to continually have that energy to continually try to keep sparking people's imaginations.
Absolutely. I think it's really fascinating to hear you sort of talk about how the way that you can get people to engage more with you is by showing the really interesting things that people have done already with the collection, which to some extent has kind of inspired what we're doing here today, by trying to showcase the fantastic work you're doing to hopefully inspire the water sector. But I just want to move on to a final question. You'll be relieved to hear. Mm-hmm. What would be, Mahendra, your one message to someone who is innovating?
I think these are kind of lessons really that we've learnt. First thing is, everything starts with a conversation. It involves a human talking to another human being. As much as we've tried to make things available openly, and people have used our collections without us even knowing, the lesson we've learnt generally is that it's important to start a conversation, and be really positive and generate positive energy, to sort of and enthusiasm, and also not be judgmental about people's ideas of what they may come up with in terms of what they might want to do. So we kind of frame that as being kind and supportive, to sort of create an atmosphere where, no idea is a stupid idea. Also some of the other things are, we think, start small. It's okay to start small, but think big as well. I know that sounds a bit of a contradiction, but by starting small, generate an example which is real, that can spark lots of questions and ideas for other people. Making mistakes is fine, and one of the things that we've learned is reject perfectionism, because it's just the enemy of progress. We've just learnt that if you spend so much time trying to make something perfect, it'll be very difficult to actually progress anywhere. So we kind of work in this space which is quite, timescales are quite short, And it's okay to make mistakes. It's part of the process. And kind of developing a philosophy of like, just sometimes it's enough just to get the job done, and therefore good enough is sometimes just good enough. And the most important thing is, once you've actually managed to achieve something, celebrate it. And it's okay to celebrate failures as well, but obviously it's better to celebrate successes. And really, all of this is all about creating sparks of inspiration, which possibly can result in much bigger projects in the future. So I would say the message is to sort of try to create all the ingredients to sort of inspire people to then do things after.
Brilliant. Well, I think it's probably more than one message, but I think we'll allow it because it was such a good message.
Okay.
But Mahendra Mahey, thank you so much for joining us here from the British Library Labs on our Spark Innovation videos.
Thank you.